He lost the love of his life many years ago. And even with all his wealth, he never managed to fill the void she left behind. Until one day, during a visit to a distant farm, his daughter tugged at his shirt and whispered, "Daddy, that farmer woman looks a lot like Mommy." The millionaire slowly turned around, and what he saw left him frozen. It was like seeing a ghost. The Chicago winter painted the Henderson estate in shades of gray and white, matching the mood that had permeated the mansion for the past 5 years. Christopher Henderson stood at the window of his study, watching snowflakes dance against the backdrop of a steel gray sky. At 42, his once youthful features had hardened, lines etching around his eyes and mouth, not from laughter, but from grief that had settled into his bones like the Chicago cold. "Mr. Henderson," his assistant's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "The board meeting has been rescheduled for Thursday, and Madison's school called. She had another episode." Christopher's jaw tightened. What happened this time? She insisted her mother was helping her with her art project. When her teacher explained that wasn't possible, Madison became upset. The assistant shifted uncomfortably. The school counselor suggested again that you might consider... "Thank you. Emma, that will be all." His tone left no room for discussion. After Emma left, Christopher loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. The amber liquid caught the dim light as he swirled it, contemplating the pattern it created rather than drinking it. 5 years. 5 years since the California Highway Patrol had called with news that would shatter his world. Isabella's car, found at the bottom of Devil's Gorge after a storm. The vehicle was mangled beyond recognition, but despite extensive searches, her body was never recovered. The authorities concluded it had been swept away by the raging waters below. The sound of small footsteps interrupted his brooding. Madison stood in the doorway, a petite figure with her mother's dark curls and his own steel blue eyes. "Daddy, are you mad at me?" Christopher set down his untouched drink and opened his arms. "Come here, princess." Madison ran to him, burying her face in his chest as he lifted her onto his lap at 8 years old. She was the spitting image of Isabella, a daily reminder of both his greatest joy and deepest loss. "I'm not mad," he said, smoothing her hair. "But we've talked about this. You know Mommy isn't." "But she was there," Madison insisted, pulling back to look at him with those earnest eyes that broke his heart. "She showed me how to mix the colors to make the perfect sunset. Mrs. Jennings couldn't see her, but I could." Christopher sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Your imagination is very special, Maddie, but sometimes the line between what we wish for and what's real gets blurry." "It wasn't my imagination," she whispered, a stubborn set to her jaw that was pure Isabella. "Mommy said you keep her memory locked away because it hurts too much to let it breathe." A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Those words, they sounded so much like something Isabella would say. His logical mind knew Madison must have overheard him talking to his therapist, or perhaps Emma discussing his grief with the housekeeper. Yet some small, irrational part of him wondered. "It's almost time for dinner," he said instead of addressing her claim. "Go wash up." After Madison left, Christopher found himself drawn upstairs, to the wing of the house he rarely visited. The master suite, their suite, remained exactly as it had been the day Isabella left for her geology research trip to California. He'd moved to one of the guest rooms after the accident, unable to sleep in their bed without her. The electronic keypad on the door beeped softly as he punched in the code. Isabella's birthday. The room beyond was immaculate, preserved like a museum exhibit. Isabella's perfume bottles lined her vanity, her favorite books stacked on the nightstand, her silk robe draped across a chaise lounge as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. The faintest scent of jasmine still lingered, her signature fragrance somehow defying time. Christopher stepped carefully across the plush carpet, as if afraid to disturb the silence. He ran his fingers over the spines of her books, geology textbooks mixed with poetry collections and dog-eared novels. On the dresser sat their wedding photo, Isabella radiant in white, her eyes bright with promise. Next to it, a picture of her holding newborn Madison, exhausted but glowing with joy. Christopher picked up the frame, dust collecting on his fingertips. "She looks more like you every day," he whispered to the photo. The soft click of the door startled him. Madison stood there, wide-eyed and solemn in her nightgown. "You're not supposed to be in here," Christopher said, though there was no real admonishment in his tone. "I come here sometimes," Madison confessed, "to talk to Mommy." Instead of correcting her, Christopher sat on the edge of the bed and patted the space beside him. Madison climbed up, leaning into his side. "What do you talk about?" "Everything, school, my friends." She looked up at him. "I tell her you're sad a lot, but you try to hide it." Christopher swallowed hard. "I miss her. I know. That's why she wants us to be happy again." Madison touched the wedding photo. "She says we're stuck, like her favorite record when it skips." "Madison? Honey, when are we going to the farm?" she asked, abruptly changing subjects with the mercurial ability only children possess. Christopher blinked at the non sequitur. "The farm? Cousin Caleb said you bought a farm with big spiky plants. He said we might go see it." Christopher made a mental note to speak with Caleb about discussing business around Madison. His cousin had certainly been eager about the agave plantation investment, practically insisting that Christopher purchase the California property. Admittedly, the financial projections looked promising. The tequila market was booming, and the land had other development potential. "We'll go soon," he promised. Surprised to find he meant it. Perhaps a change of scenery would do them both good. "Spring break is coming up. Would you like that?" Madison nodded enthusiastically. "Can we stay there? Not in a hotel?" "I suppose we could. The main house is being renovated, but it should be ready by then." Later that night, after tucking Madison in, Christopher found himself drawn to his home office. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a thick file labeled Isabella, Accident Investigation. Inside were police reports, witness statements, search records, and dozens of photographs of the crash site. He'd hired private investigators for years, unwilling to accept that Isabella was simply gone. But eventually, even he had to admit defeat. The phone on his desk rang, startling him from his grim review. "Christopher, it's Caleb. Have you made a decision about visiting the agave farm?" Christopher leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "Actually, yes. Madison and I will head out for spring break." A pause on the line. "That's unexpected. I thought you'd send a management team. Change of scenery might be good for us. Besides, I want to see the property firsthand, especially with the expansion opportunities you've mentioned." "Absolutely. Absolutely," Caleb said quickly. "I'll make all the arrangements. The property next door is still available, by the way. The owner's struggling with the drought. Perfect timing to expand our water rights." "Let's see the original investment first," Christopher said cautiously. "Madison seems quite excited about it." After hanging up, Christopher returned to the file, focusing on a satellite map of the accident area. Devil's Gorge was just 20 miles from his new agave plantation, a coincidence that made him uneasy for reasons he couldn't articulate. He closed the file and glanced at the calendar. 2 weeks until spring break. 2 weeks until he returned to the state where he'd lost everything. And the strange thing was, for the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than dread. When thinking about the future, it felt dangerously close to hope. The California morning sun beat down on Rachel Sullivan's back as she knelt in the dusty soil. Examining the withering agave plants, sweat trickled down her temple, leaving a trail through the fine layer of dirt on her skin. The drought that had plagued the region for months showed no signs of letting up, and her small farm was suffering. "Come on, you fighters," she murmured, gently touching the blue-green leaves of her favorite plant. "Just hang in there a little longer." Rachel stood up, wincing as her right knee protested. The old injury, one of many she'd woken up with 5 years ago, always acted up in dry weather. She shaded her eyes with a sun-weathered hand, surveying her modest 10 acres. The land wasn't much, but it was all she had. All she knew, which wasn't saying much, considering she couldn't remember anything before waking up in Arthur and Ruth Sullivan's spare bedroom half a decade ago. The old couple had found her downstream from Devil's Gorge after a violent storm. Unconscious and badly injured, they'd told her how they'd debated taking her to the hospital, but the nearest one was an hour away, and they feared moving her might do more harm than good. More importantly, they'd grown distrustful of the local authorities after years of watching them favor wealthy landowners in every dispute. "What's got you looking so serious?" called a familiar voice. Rachel turned to see Miguel, her farmhand, approaching with 2 bottles of water. He tossed one to her, which she caught effortlessly. Just wondering if rain dances actually work, she replied with a wry smile. Uncapping the bottle and taking a grateful swig, Miguel's weathered face crinkled with amusement. My grandmother would say yes, but only if performed under a full moon by someone pure of heart. Then I'm out of luck, Rachel said, tapping her temple. Who knows what skeletons are buried in my forgotten past? Miguel's smile faded. Any more of those dreams? Rachel hesitated, then nodded. She rarely discussed her recurring nightmares with anyone but Miguel, who had worked for the Sullivans long before she arrived and had become her closest friend after their passing. Same one. I'm in a car, driving in the rain. The windshield wipers can hardly keep up. My phone rings, and when I look down, she made a diving motion with her hand. Then just water, darkness, choking, and the little girl. She was there too. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to capture the fading fragments of the dream, calling for her mommy. I could see her so clearly this time. Dark curly hair, blue eyes. Miguel studied her face. You know what Ruth always said about those dreams, that they were memories, not dreams. Rachel shook her head. If that's true, then I abandoned a child somewhere, Miguel. What kind of person does that make me? Someone who nearly died, he reminded her gently. Who knows what happened that night? Maybe you were trying to reach her when the accident happened. Rachel absently fingered the silver chain around her neck, where a delicate medallion with the letter I engraved on it hung. It was one of only 2 personal items found with her, the other being a plain gold wedding band that she kept in a small wooden box on her nightstand. Too painful a reminder of a life and love she couldn't remember. Come on, Miguel said, breaking the melancholy moment. We need to check the irrigation system before the farmer's market. Those handmade soaps won't sell themselves. Inside her small farmhouse, Rachel quickly showered and changed. The home was modest but cozy, filled with mismatched furniture that Arthur and Ruth had collected over decades. After they passed, Ruth from cancer 2 years ago, Arthur from what Rachel suspected was a broken heart 6 months later, they'd left her everything: the farm, the house, and their unconditional acceptance, which had meant more than any property. As she braided her damp hair, Rachel studied her reflection. The face looking back at her was both familiar and strange, a paradox she'd grown accustomed to. Faint scars marked her right cheekbone and jawline, souvenirs from whatever accident had robbed her of her past. Her hair, once long according to Ruth, was now cut practically to her shoulders, the rich brown strands streaked with premature silver at the temples. Ruth had speculated that Rachel was in her early 30s when they found her. That would put her around 38 now, though some days she felt ancient, and other days like a newborn, still learning how the world worked. In the kitchen, she picked up the mail Miguel had brought in. Most were bills. The farm barely broke even in good times. And these were not good times. But one envelope caught her attention, official looking, with the county seal. Rachel tore it open, her stomach sinking as she read. Another offer, Miguel asked, coming in from the porch. Not exactly. She handed him the letter. The water board is reviewing all private well permits in the area. They're sending inspectors next month. Miguel cursed softly in Spanish. They can't just take our water rights. They can if they decide the aquifer is at risk. Rachel ran a hand through her damp hair. This is the 3rd regulatory hurdle this year. First the property taxes doubled, then the agricultural zoning review. Now this. It's not a coincidence, Miguel insisted. Someone wants this land, Rachel. These are pressure tactics. She couldn't disagree. For the past year, a steady stream of offers had come in for her property, each higher than the last. The most recent had been from a company called HC Agricultural Investments, a sum that made her hands shake when she saw the zeros, enough to solve all her financial troubles and start fresh somewhere else. Maybe I should sell, she said quietly. This drought might be the new normal. The farm's barely surviving. Miguel's expression hardened. This isn't just about the farm. Arthur and Ruth protected you when you had nothing. Not even a name. Their land is your only link to who you are. Who I am, Rachel laughed bitterly. I'm a blank slate, Miguel. A woman who makes soap and grows dying plants. My past, whoever I was, that person is gone. Then why keep this? He gently touched the medallion at her throat. Why keep the ring? Why write in that journal every night, trying to piece together your dreams? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a reminder. We need to get to the market. As they loaded her handmade soaps, herbal tinctures, and the few vegetables that had survived the drought into Miguel's old truck, Rachel's head suddenly throbbed with the familiar onset of one of her migraines. She pressed her fingers to her temples, willing away the pain and the strange flashes that often accompanied it. Fragments of luxury she couldn't reconcile with her simple life: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a closet full of designer clothes. Another one, Miguel asked with concern. I'll be fine. She reached into her pocket for her medication, then hesitated, her fingers brushing against something else. The small, worn, leather-bound journal Arthur had given her for her first Christmas with them. Rachel made a decision. Tonight, after the market, I want to try again with the hypnotherapist in Ventura. Miguel looked surprised. You said that didn't work. I need to try something, she said, staring at the dust rising from their wheels as they pulled away from the farm. These headaches are getting worse, and the dreams more vivid. There's something trying to break through, Miguel. Something important. What she didn't tell him was about the newest element in her recurring nightmare, the sound of a man's voice calling a name she couldn't quite hear. A voice filled with such love and desperation that it haunted her even in waking hours. A voice that seemed to be calling her home. The Ventura County Spring Fair buzzed with activity as Christopher navigated the crowded pathways, Madison's small hand firmly clasped in his. The California sunshine felt foreign after Chicago's lingering winter. Too bright, too warm, too cheerful for his perpetual melancholy. They'd arrived at their new property yesterday, and Madison had immediately begged to visit the local fair advertised on flyers all over town. Can we get cotton candy, Daddy? Madison tugged at his hand, pointing toward a vendor with a whirling machine of pink fluff. After lunch, Christopher promised, checking his watch. We're meeting Cousin Caleb at the food court in 15 minutes. Madison's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Does he have to come with us? He talks too much about boring stuff. Christopher couldn't help but smile. His daughter's assessment of Caleb wasn't entirely off base. His cousin had been calling constantly since they'd arrived, eager to discuss expansion plans and neighboring properties. Christopher had finally agreed to meet him at the fair, but insisted it would be brief. This trip was primarily for Madison. He won't stay long, Christopher assured her. He just wants to talk about the farm. Our farm, Madison corrected with surprising possessiveness. I like it there. It feels special. Christopher had been surprised by Madison's immediate attachment to the property. The old Spanish-style ranch house was spacious, but needed updating. The fields of blue agave stretched in neat rows toward distant mountains, and a small orchard of fruit trees bordered one side. It was beautiful, certainly, but hardly the type of place to captivate an 8-year-old raised in urban luxury. What makes it special? He asked, genuinely curious. Madison considered this seriously, her brow furrowing in concentration. It feels like it was waiting for us, she finally said, like it knows us. Before Christopher could respond to this odd statement, a tinny loudspeaker announced the start of a sheep shearing demonstration. Can we watch, please? Madison bounced on her toes, earlier conversation forgotten. Sure, princess. He checked his phone. We still have time before meeting Caleb. They joined the gathering crowd around a small arena where a local farmer was explaining the process to the audience. Madison listened with rapt attention, asking Christopher whispered questions about wool and sheep care that he struggled to answer. As the demonstration concluded, Madison spotted a craft section nearby. Look, Daddy, they're making soaps. Indeed, a modest booth displayed colorful handcrafted soaps and small bottles of oils. A hand-painted sign read, Sullivan Farms, Natural Products. Just for a few minutes, Christopher agreed, letting Madison pull him toward the booth. The vendor was busy with another customer, her back turned to them as she carefully wrapped a purchase in brown paper. Madison immediately began examining the displayed soaps, picking up one shaped like a honeycomb and inhaling deeply. This smells like the flowers near our orchard, she declared, holding it up for Christopher to sniff. He had to admit the scent was lovely, lavender with something else he couldn't identify, familiar yet elusive as Madison moved along the display. Christopher idly picked up a small bottle labeled Headache Relief. Isabella had suffered from migraines. He'd become something of an expert on homeopathic remedies during their marriage. The lavender chamomile blend is good for tension headaches, said a woman's voice as the vendor turned toward them. But if it's migraines you're dealing with, I recommend—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at Christopher. He felt a strange jolt of recognition, though he was certain they'd never met. "I'm sorry," she recovered quickly. "Were you interested in the headache remedies?" Christopher couldn't answer. He was transfixed by the woman's face, heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and large, expressive eyes. Her hair was shorter and streaked with premature silver, and faint scars marked her right cheek, but the resemblance was undeniable. Madison, who had wandered to the other end of the booth, turned back and froze. Her soap slipped from her fingers, clattering to the ground. "Daddy!" she shouted, loud enough to draw stares. "Daddy, that lady looks just like Mommy!" The vendor, whose name tag read Rachel, flinched as if struck. Her eyes darted between Madison and Christopher, confusion evident. "I'm sorry," Christopher managed, finding his voice. "My daughter." "It's her, Daddy," Madison insisted, rushing back and grabbing his arm. "Look at her face, it's Mommy." Rachel's complexion had gone ashen. She raised a trembling hand to her temple, wincing in apparent pain. "Madison, that's enough," Christopher said firmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. The resemblance was uncanny, but this woman was a stranger, and they were causing a scene. "Is everything all right here?" A Hispanic man appeared from behind the booth, eyeing Christopher warily. "Fine, Miguel," Rachel said, though she didn't sound fine at all. Her voice was strained. "Just a misunderstanding." "You don't understand," Madison insisted, turning to Rachel with desperate earnestness. "You're my mommy. You look different, but it's you. I know it's you." Rachel shook her head, backing away slightly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I'm not your mother." "You are." Madison's voice rose with distress. "Your eyes are the same. You touch your ear when you're nervous, just like Mommy did. Look, Daddy, she's doing it right now." Indeed, Rachel's right hand had risen unconsciously to tug at her earlobe, a gesture so hauntingly familiar that Christopher felt dizzy. It had been Isabella's tell when she was uncomfortable, a habit she'd tried unsuccessfully to break. "Madison, please," Christopher said, placing his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "This isn't appropriate. I apologize," he added to Rachel. "My wife passed away 5 years ago. You bear a resemblance that confused my daughter." Rachel's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, fear, he couldn't tell. 5 years, she echoed faintly. "Yes, a car accident in—" He stopped, unsure why he was explaining his tragedy to a soap vendor at a county fair. "Again, I apologize for my daughter's outburst." Rachel nodded mechanically, but her breathing had quickened, and she pressed her fingers to her temple again, clearly in pain. "I need some air," she murmured to Miguel, and without another word, she hurried from behind the booth and disappeared into the crowd. "Rachel," Miguel called after her, then turned to Christopher with undisguised hostility. "Whatever game you're playing, it stops now." "It's not a game," Christopher replied evenly, "merely a striking coincidence." As Miguel moved to follow Rachel, Christopher noticed something glinting on the ground. He bent to pick it up, a delicate silver medallion on a broken chain. It must have fallen when Rachel fled. The pendant bore a single letter. Daddy, that's like the necklace in the photos of Mommy," Madison whispered, wide-eyed. The one Grandma Janet said was too simple for a Henderson wife. Christopher closed his fingers around the medallion, a chill running through him. Despite the warm day, before he could process what was happening, a familiar voice called his name. "Christopher, there you are." Caleb Henderson approached, impeccably dressed despite the casual setting, a contrast to the dusty jeans and boots of the locals. "I've been looking everywhere for you." His gaze traveled to Madison, then to the medallion in Christopher's hand. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Christopher said automatically, pocketing the necklace. "Just shopping for souvenirs." Caleb raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing him. "Well, I've got exciting news. The owner of the adjacent property has received our latest offer. I think she's finally ready to sell." "She?" Christopher asked, his attention snapping back. "Rachel Sullivan," Caleb said, consulting his phone. "Stubborn woman. Been holding out for months, but the drought's hitting her hard. It's only a matter of time. Christopher stared at the direction where Rachel had disappeared, Madison's insistent tugging at his arm suddenly taking on new significance. "What do you know about her?" he asked Caleb casually. "Not much. Local oddity from what I gather. Shown up out of nowhere about 5 years back. Taken in by the old couple who owned that farm. No background, no history." Caleb shrugged. "Probably running from something. Doesn't matter. Once we acquire her water rights, the entire valley opens up for us. 5 years. No history." Christopher's mind raced, connections forming that he didn't want to acknowledge. It was impossible, insane. Yet Madison was still staring in the direction Rachel had fled, with absolute certainty in her young eyes. "Daddy," she said quietly, "we have to find her." She dropped her necklace. "We have to give it back. We will," he promised, his decision made in that moment. "We absolutely will." Rachel's hands trembled as she fumbled with her truck keys. The migraine had intensified, blinding flashes of pain accompanied by fractured images. A child's bedroom with star-painted walls, a man's laughter, a Chicago skyline view from high above. She finally managed to unlock the door and collapsed into the driver's seat, pressing her palms against her eyes. "Rachel," Miguel's voice called out. He appeared at her window, concern etched on his weathered face. "What happened back there?" "I don't know," she whispered. "That little girl, when she looked at me, and then her father." Miguel climbed into the passenger seat. "Who were they?" "I have no idea, but when she called me Mommy something," shifted. Rachel's hand instinctively went to her throat, fingers searching for the medallion that was no longer there. "My necklace. It's gone." "I'll go back and look," Miguel offered. "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No. We need to leave now." As Rachel drove away from the fairgrounds, her mind raced. The man, tall, handsome, haunted eyes, had stirred something deep within her. A phantom recognition, like seeing a word on the tip of your tongue, but being unable to speak it. "The girl said I looked like her mother," Rachel said quietly, "that her mother died 5 years ago." Miguel's expression grew serious. 5 years, when Arthur and Ruth found you." "Coincidence," Rachel insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Back at the farm, Rachel went straight to her bedroom and pulled out the small wooden box from her nightstand. Inside lay the gold wedding band, its interior inscription worn but still legible. "C and I, our love defies time," she had always assumed. I stood for her real name, but had never been able to recall what it might be. Next, she reached under her bed and retrieved an old leather-bound journal. Arthur had given it to her during her first year with them, encouraging her to record her dreams and any memory fragments. The early entries were sporadic, confused, notes about nightmares, disconnected images, frustration at her inability to remember. She flipped forward, scanning entries from the past few years. One caught her eye from 2 summers ago. "Dreamed of a skyline tonight. Tall buildings against a gray sky. A large lake stretching to the horizon. Standing at a window high up, watching a storm roll in. Feeling someone's arms around me from behind. A chin resting on my shoulder. Safe. Home. Woke up crying. Chicago." That had to be Chicago she'd dreamed about. And today, when that man had spoken, his voice had a hint of a Midwestern accent. Rachel closed the journal, her decision made. She needed answers, and she knew where to start looking. She's our neighbor." Christopher stared at the satellite view on Caleb's tablet. Rachel Sullivan's farm bordered his new property, separated only by a ridgeline. "For now," Caleb said with a smirk. "Like I said, she'll sell soon enough. The offer we've made is more than generous." They sat on the terrace of Christopher's newly acquired ranch house. Madison having been sent to bed despite her protests, the night was clear. Stars sprinkled across the velvet sky in a way they never appeared in Chicago. "Have you had a background check done on her?" Christopher asked, keeping his tone casual. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Why would I? She's just a small-time farmer standing in our way." "Curiosity." Christopher swirled the bourbon in his glass. "You mentioned she appeared about 5 years ago. That's an interesting coincidence." "What are you getting at, Chris?" "Nothing." Christopher pulled the silver medallion from his pocket, turning it over in his palm. "Madison dropped something at the fair. I thought I might return it personally." Caleb studied his cousin's face. This isn't about the medallion. What happened at the fair? Madison was acting strange during dinner. Christopher hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. We met Mrs. Sullivan at her booth. Madison thought she resembled Isabella. Ah. Caleb's expression softened to one of practiced sympathy. Kids hold on to hope, don't they? I remember Madison used to see Isabella everywhere that first year. This was different, Christopher said firmly. The resemblance is remarkable. Chris, Caleb leaned forward. Isabella is gone. You had the best investigators money could buy searching for years. The car was found. The evidence was conclusive. Without a body, Christopher reminded him. In a raging river at the bottom of a gorge after a record-breaking storm, Caleb countered. Be reasonable. He stood, gathering his things. Listen, I understand seeing someone who resembles her might stir things up, but don't let it distract you. We have serious business opportunities here. After Caleb left, Christopher retreated to his temporary office. He opened his laptop and pulled up a secure folder labeled Isabella, Private Investigation. Inside was everything he'd collected over 5 years of searching. Police reports, search team logs, witness statements, forensic analyses. He clicked on a subfolder titled Accident Scene and began reviewing the photos from Devil's Gorge, the mangled remains of Isabella's rental car, recovered from rocks below, the broken guardrail where the vehicle had gone over, the raging waters that had made recovery efforts nearly impossible. One detail had always bothered him. Isabella's body wasn't the only thing missing from the car. Her purse, phone, and the small overnight bag she always traveled with were never recovered either. The investigators had explained it away, swept downstream by the current. But what if there was another explanation? Christopher opened a new browser window and typed, Rachel Sullivan, Ventura County. Little information appeared. A business license for Sullivan Farms filed 3 years ago. A mention in a local paper about an agricultural award. A listing for her booth at farmers markets. Next, he searched for amnesia after car accidents and spent an hour reading medical journals and case studies. It wasn't common, but traumatic brain injuries could indeed cause memory loss, sometimes permanent. Christopher stared at the medallion in his hand, the letter I glinting in the lamplight. Isabella's medallion, a simple piece he'd given her on their first anniversary. Janet had complained it wasn't extravagant enough for a Henderson wife, but Isabella had treasured it, rarely taking it off. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Madison stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. You're supposed to be asleep, princess, he said gently. I can't. She patted over and climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in months. I keep thinking about the lady at the fair, about Mommy. Christopher wrapped his arms around her. I know it's confusing. The lady looks like Mommy, but it's more than that, Madison insisted. When I saw her, it felt warm here. She placed a small hand over her heart, like when I go into Mommy's room at home. Christopher didn't know what to say. Children's intuition or desperate wishful thinking. She didn't recognize us, he said softly, but she touched her ear, Daddy, and she had Mommy's necklace, the one with the eye. Christopher showed her the medallion. This one. Madison's eyes widened. You found it. We have to give it back to her. We will, he promised. But Madison, I need you to understand something. Even if this woman looks like Mommy, even if she has a similar necklace, that doesn't mean... Can we just see her again? Madison pleaded. Please. Against his better judgment, Christopher nodded. Yes, I'd like to talk to her anyway. Later, after tucking Madison back into bed, Christopher returned to his investigation. He pulled up the original police report, focusing on a detail he'd overlooked before. The responding officer had noted that while the guardrail was broken, there were no skid marks on the road leading to the point of impact, suggesting Isabella hadn't tried to brake before going over the edge. At the time, investigators had theorized she might have fallen asleep at the wheel or been distracted. But what if the accident wasn't an accident at all? Christopher's phone chimed with an incoming email. It was from James Bennett, the private investigator he'd kept on retainer even after officially ending the search. The subject line read, Information on Rachel Sullivan. He opened it, his heart racing as he scanned the contents. Bennett had done a preliminary background check and found something strange. Rachel Sullivan simply didn't exist before 5 years ago. No birth certificate, no social security number, no school records, nothing until Arthur and Ruth Sullivan registered her as their dependent on tax forms. The final line of the email made Christopher's blood run cold. Request permission to interview local physician who treated IRS for injuries consistent with automobile accident recovery approximately 5 years ago. Date of initial treatment coincides within 72 hours of IH disappearance. Christopher's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was he losing his mind? Chasing ghosts? Or was the impossible becoming increasingly plausible? He typed a single word in reply. Proceed. Rachel watched the headlights of the approaching vehicle from her porch, anxiety tightening her chest. The truck crawled up her gravel driveway, stopping by the ancient oak that shaded her farmhouse. She hadn't expected visitors, especially not at 9 in the morning when she should have been at the weekend market. Who is it? Miguel called from inside, where he was fixing a leaky faucet. I don't know, she replied, squinting against the morning sun. Stay inside. The driver's door opened, and Rachel's breath caught. Even from a distance, she recognized him. The man from the fair, the one whose daughter had called her Mommy. He approached slowly, as if giving her time to run if she wanted to. Ms. Sullivan, he called when he was halfway to the porch. I'm Christopher Henderson. We met yesterday at the fair. Rachel didn't respond, her fight-or-flight instinct warring with a strange, inexplicable pull toward this stranger. I believe this belongs to you, he continued, holding up something that glinted in the sunlight. Her medallion. She descended the porch steps cautiously. How did you find me? Your farm borders my property, he explained, stopping a respectful distance away. I recently purchased the old Alvarez estate. You're the new agave plantation owner. Rachel's wariness increased. The one who's been trying to buy my water rights. Christopher frowned. That's my cousin's project. I only recently became involved in the actual management. He extended his hand, offering the medallion. My daughter noticed when this fell. Rachel accepted it, careful not to let their fingers touch. The familiar weight of the pendant in her palm provided an odd comfort. Thank you, she said stiffly. My daughter wanted to return it personally, but I thought that might be uncomfortable for you. Rachel glanced past him to the truck, relieved to see no child inside. Where is she? At the ranch with the housekeeper. Christopher shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Sullivan, I realize this is forward, but may I speak with you for a moment? Privately. Before she could respond, Miguel emerged from the house, toolbox in hand, eyes narrowed suspiciously. Everything okay, Rachel? Fine, she assured him, though she was far from certain. Mr. Henderson was just returning my necklace from yesterday. Miguel's posture remained rigid. I'll be working on the irrigation system if you need me. The pointed look he gave Christopher clearly communicated the implied threat. After Miguel walked away, an awkward silence fell between them. Would you like some coffee? Rachel finally offered, surprising herself. We could talk on the porch. Christopher nodded, relief evident in his expression. That would be great, thank you. Seated in weathered Adirondack chairs with steaming mugs, they studied each other discreetly. Up close, Rachel noted his expensive watch and the fine quality of his casual clothes, wealth worn with the ease of someone born to it. His eyes, however, held a sadness that seemed at odds with his privileged appearance. Your daughter, Rachel began hesitantly. Is she okay? Yesterday was obviously upsetting for her. Madison is resilient, Christopher replied, but confused. She lost her mother when she was very young, just barely 3. I'm sorry, Rachel said sincerely. That's a difficult age to understand such loss. It is. Christopher's gaze was penetrating. May I ask you something personal, Mrs. Sullivan? Rachel tensed but nodded. How long have you lived in this area? About 5 years, she answered carefully. The Sullivans, Arthur and Ruth, they took me in. Took you in, Christopher prodded gently. Rachel sipped her coffee, considering how much to reveal. Something about this man made her want to confide in him, which both comforted and terrified her. I was in an accident, she finally said. They found me injured, with no identification, no memories. They gave me a home when I had nothing, not even a name. She smiled sadly. Rachel was their daughter's name. She died young, Christopher's knuckles whitened around his mug. No memories at all. Fragments sometimes, dreams. She touched her temple reflexively. Migraines often trigger flashes, but nothing substantial. Nothing that helps me understand who I was. 5 years ago, Christopher said softly, more to himself than to her. Near here. Devil's Gorge, Rachel confirmed, then frowned. Why all these questions, Mr. Henderson? Christopher set down his mug and leaned forward. My wife, Isabella, disappeared 5 years ago. Her car went off the road at Devil's Gorge during a storm. Her body was never recovered. Rachel felt suddenly cold despite the warm morning. And you think, because your daughter, because I resemble... I know how it sounds, Christopher acknowledged. Believe me, I've spent 5 years accepting that Isabella was gone. I'm not a man given to fantasy or false hope. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a photograph, extending it with a slightly trembling hand. This was taken 6 months before the accident. Rachel accepted the photo reluctantly. A beautiful dark-haired woman smiled at the camera, a young child on her lap. She wore a simple silver necklace with a pendant. The medallion was a gift from me, Christopher explained, for our first anniversary. Rachel stared at the woman in the photo. The resemblance was undeniable, though this woman seemed softer somehow, more refined. Her hair was longer, her face unmarked by the scars Rachel carried. This proves nothing, Rachel said, returning the photo more abruptly than she intended. Many women have similar features, similar jewelry. Of course, Christopher agreed quickly. I'm not claiming to know who you are, Ms. Sullivan. I'm merely exploring a possibility. The possibility that I'm your dead wife, with amnesia. Rachel stood, anger suddenly flaring. Do you have any idea how invasive that is? How presumptuous? Christopher rose as well. I apologize, I didn't come here to upset you. Then why did you come? She demanded. To satisfy your curiosity, to give your daughter false hope, to return your necklace, he said evenly. And yes, to meet the woman my daughter is convinced is her mother. Madison has always been intuitive, sometimes in ways I can't explain. Rachel felt her anger deflating, replaced by a profound weariness. Mr. Henderson, I'm sympathetic to your loss and your daughter's pain, but I'm not Isabella. I have my own life, my own struggles. This farm, it's all I have. I understand. Christopher reached into his wallet and withdrew a business card. If you ever want to talk more, or if you remember anything that might resonate, please call me. Rachel accepted the card automatically. I think you should go. As Christopher walked back to his truck, Rachel noticed Miguel watching from the edge of the orchard. She waved to indicate she was fine, though she felt anything but. Inside, she went straight to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept her journal. She stared at the photo of Isabella Henderson, then at her own reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The scars, the shorter hair, the weathered complexion from years working outdoors. Differences, yes, but superficial ones. Beneath them, the bone structure, the eyes, the shape of the lips. Rachel opened her journal to a blank page and began writing frantically. Chicago, the man, Christopher, he's from Chicago. I've dreamed of Chicago. The skyline, the lake, and the medallion. He says he gave it to his wife. I for Isabella. The timeline matches. The accident location matches. But I'm not her. I can't be her. What kind of woman forgets her own child? Her husband. She flipped back through earlier entries, searching for any mention of a young girl with curly dark hair and blue eyes. There, an entry from last year. Dreamed of a child's room, stars painted on the ceiling, a music box playing a lullaby. I knew all the words too, though I can't remember them now. A small voice saying, "Again, Mommy. Again." Woke up crying. Rachel closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. If she really was Isabella Henderson, what did that mean? Who had caused her accident? Was it truly an accident at all? And more terrifying, if she wasn't Isabella, why were these memories invading her dreams? Outside her window, she could see Christopher's truck still at the end of her driveway. He sat inside, head bowed, seemingly gathering himself before driving away. An inexplicable urge to run after him swept through her. But Rachel remained frozen by her window, watching as he finally started the engine and disappeared down the road. She looked down at the business card in her trembling hand. Christopher Henderson, CEO, Henderson Global Investments, a Chicago phone number. Rachel placed it carefully beside her journal, then fastened the medallion around her neck once more. Whether it was truly hers or belonged to a ghost whose identity was trying to claim her, she couldn't say, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her carefully constructed life had just been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. Christopher sat in his Range Rover at the end of Rachel Sullivan's driveway, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The conversation had gone both better and worse than he'd expected. Better because she hadn't immediately called the police to report him for harassment. Worse because he'd clearly shaken her with his suspicions. His phone rang, Caleb's name flashing on the screen. Christopher considered ignoring it, but finally answered. "Where are you?" Caleb demanded without preamble. "We have a meeting with the water board representatives in an hour." "I had an errand to run," Christopher replied vaguely, starting the engine. "I'll meet you there. You're at the Sullivan farm, aren't you?" Caleb's tone sharpened. "Chris, what are you doing?" "Returning property to its rightful owner." Christopher pulled onto the main road. "I'll see you at the meeting." He hung up before Caleb could respond, his mind racing. Rachel Sullivan's reaction had been exactly what one would expect from someone confronted with such an outlandish suggestion. Incredulity, anger, fear. Yet there had been something else there too. A hesitation when she looked at Isabella's photo. A flicker of recognition that she'd quickly masked. The water board offices occupied a plain government building in Ventura. Christopher found Caleb waiting impatiently in the lobby, tablet in hand. Immaculately dressed in contrast to Christopher's casual attire. "You look like hell," Caleb remarked, eyeing him critically. "Did she reject you? What are you talking about?" "Rachel Sullivan," Caleb smirked. "You're obviously infatuated. Can't say I blame you. She's attractive in that earthy, untamed way. Just don't let it interfere with business." Christopher bristled, but held his tongue as they were ushered into a conference room where 3 water board officials waited. The meeting began with pleasantries, but quickly dove into technical details, aquifer levels, sustainability plans, sustainability. "Permit requirements, Mr. Henderson," said the senior official, an older woman with steel gray hair. "Your cousin has outlined an ambitious development plan for your new property, including significant expansion. We're concerned about the impact on the regional aquifer, especially during this prolonged drought." Christopher glanced at Caleb, who hadn't mentioned any expansion plans beyond the initial agave plantation. "Could you elaborate on these concerns?" The woman, Dr. Ellis, according to her nameplate, slid a folder across the table. Inside were geological surveys, water table measurements, and a detailed map of the area with property boundaries marked. "The Alvarez property you purchased sits atop part of a significant aquifer," Dr. Ellis explained. "Your neighbor, Miss Sullivan, owns land covering another section. Together, these properties control access to nearly 60% of the region's groundwater, which is why consolidating ownership makes sense," Caleb interjected smoothly. "Our company can implement comprehensive water management across both properties, more efficient than 2 separate owners." Dr. Ellis's expression remained neutral. "Perhaps, however, Ms. Sullivan's farm has an exemplary record of water conservation. Our concerns stem from HC Agricultural Investments' proposals for expanded operations." Christopher frowned. "HC Agricultural Investments? Your company's subsidiary?" another official supplied. "The entity making the purchase offers to Ms. Sullivan." Christopher kept his face carefully blank, though internally alarm bells were ringing. He had no knowledge of this subsidiary, nor had Caleb mentioned creating one. "I believe my cousin has been handling those negotiations," he said carefully. "Caleb, perhaps you could clarify." Caleb smiled tightly. "A routine corporate structure to compartmentalize the acquisitions. Nothing unusual." "What exactly are the expansion plans?" Christopher pressed. "Beyond the agave plantation," Caleb explained with forced patience. "We've proposed a bottling facility, visitor center, resort, and housing development. Standard vertical integration, none of which Caleb had mentioned to him. Christopher studied the maps more closely, noting the areas marked for development. A detail caught his eye, a geological notation near Devil's Gorge indicating significant underground water reserves. "Mr. Henderson," Dr. Ellis continued, These plans would require substantial groundwater pumping. Mrs. Sullivan has filed objections, providing evidence that such extraction could irreparably damage the aquifer. Evidence? Christopher asked, genuinely curious. Geological surveys, she confirmed. Quite detailed ones. Actually, Mrs. Sullivan seems to have an unexpected background in hydrogeology. Christopher's pulse quickened. Isabella had been a geologist specializing in groundwater systems. It was why she'd been in California in the first place, consulting on drought mitigation strategies. "May I see those surveys?" he requested. The official hesitated, then nodded. They're public record, part of her objection filing. As Christopher examined the documents, he recognized the methodical approach, the precise notation style. Though prepared recently, they mirrored Isabella's work exactly, down to the distinctive way she annotated potential flow patterns. "These are remarkable," he commented, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Yes," Dr. Ellis agreed. Ms. Sullivan indicated she did the fieldwork herself, impressive for someone without formal credentials in the field. Caleb cleared his throat. "Fascinating as Ms. Sullivan's hobbies may be, they don't change the economic realities. Her small farm is financially unsustainable. Our offer represents her best option. That's for her to decide," Dr. Ellis responded coolly. "Now, regarding your permit applications," the meeting continued, but Christopher barely participated, letting Caleb handle the technical questions. His mind was consumed by this new revelation. Rachel Sullivan, a woman with no past, somehow possessed Isabella's exact expertise in groundwater geology, expertise that directly threatened Caleb's development plans. This couldn't be coincidence. As they left the building, Christopher turned to Caleb. "Why didn't you tell me about the subsidiary or the expansion plans?" Caleb sighed dramatically. "Because you've been disengaged from the business for years, Chris. I didn't think you'd care about the details as long as the investment was sound. I care about being blindsided in meetings, and about acquisitions being made without my knowledge." "Fine." Caleb stopped walking, facing Christopher directly. "The truth is, you needed this investment to work. After years of hiding in your office while the company stagnated, the board was losing confidence. I created a plan that would secure our future and pulled strings to get you involved personally. You should be thanking me." Christopher studied his cousin's face. They'd grown up together. Caleb always in his shadow. The younger, less accomplished Henderson. Christopher had never questioned his loyalty before. And Rachel Sullivan, why are you so determined to acquire her property specifically? Caleb's expression hardened. "Because without it, the development potential is limited. Her land sits above the most accessible part of the aquifer. We need those water rights. The same area Isabella was surveying before her accident," Christopher noted quietly. A flash of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Caleb's face before he masked it with irritation. "For God's sake, are we back to that?" "Your wife's work was unrelated to our current project." "Was it?" Christopher challenged. "The accident happened 20 miles from here, Caleb. She was researching this exact aquifer. Pure coincidence," Caleb insisted. "Listen to yourself, Chris. You're connecting dots that don't exist because some farmer happens to resemble Isabella. It's unhealthy." "Maybe," Christopher conceded, not wanting to reveal how deep his suspicions ran. "But I want complete transparency on this project moving forward. No more hidden subsidiaries. No more expansion plans I don't know about." "Fine," Caleb agreed tersely. "Now can we please focus on business? The Sullivan woman is proving difficult. We may need to increase pressure tactics." "What does that mean?" Christopher asked sharply. "Legal pressure," Caleb clarified. "Challenging her well permits, property boundaries, that sort of thing. Standard negotiation leverage." Christopher's jaw tightened. No pressure tactics. If she doesn't want to sell, we adapt our plans." "That's not how this works," Caleb protested. "We've invested millions already. The board expects results." "I don't care," Christopher stated flatly. "Find another solution that doesn't involve forcing a woman off land that's been in her family for generations." "Her family?" Caleb scoffed. "She's not even related to the Sullivans. She's nobody, Chris. A drifter they took in out of pity." Christopher's phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from James Bennett, his private investigator. "Urgent news regarding RS medical records. Call ASAP." I need to take this, Christopher said. Stepping away, we'll continue this discussion later. As Caleb stalked off toward his own car, Christopher made the call. What did you find? He asked without preamble when Bennett answered. I located the doctor who treated Rachel Sullivan 5 years ago, Bennett reported. Dr. Samuel Ramirez. Semi-retired now. The Sullivans brought her to him privately instead of a hospital. Apparently they distrusted the local authorities due to some previous land disputes. And, Christopher prompted, heart racing. The injuries were consistent with a severe car crash. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, traumatic brain injury. But here's the kicker. When they brought her in, she was wearing a gold wedding band with an inscription inside. Dr. Ramirez remembered it clearly because the Sullivans asked if it might help identify her. Christopher closed his eyes, already knowing the answer. What did it say? C&I, our love defies time, Bennett confirmed. Mr. Henderson, this can't be coincidence. Rachel Sullivan is almost certainly your wife. Dr. Eric Palmer's hands trembled as he poured himself another drink. He rarely indulged during working hours, but today was an exception. The unexpected call from Christopher Henderson had shaken him badly. 5 years of carefully maintained silence. And now this. Questions about Isabella's accident report. Inconsistencies in the documentation. The doorbell rang, startling Palmer into spilling whiskey on his desk. He cursed, dabbing at the mess before straightening his tie and heading to the door of his private practice. Mr. Henderson? Palmer greeted, forcing a smile. I appreciate you coming on such short notice. Christopher Henderson's expression was grim as he stepped inside. Your message sounded urgent. Yes, well, Palmer gestured toward his office. Please, have a seat. Christopher remained standing. You said you had information about my wife's accident. Information you've withheld for 5 years. Palmer sank into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 57 years. I never intended. That is to say, I was placed in an impossible position. By whom? Palmer took a deep breath. Your cousin, Caleb Henderson, approached me shortly after the accident. He suggested it would be better for everyone if Isabella's death certificate was processed without the usual formalities. Christopher's face hardened. You falsified a death certificate without a body. There were witnesses to the accident, Palmer defended weakly. The car was recovered. Under the circumstances. Under what circumstances? Christopher demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Palmer drained his glass. Financial ones. I had gambling debts. Significant ones. Caleb knew about them and offered to make them disappear if I expedited matters. Christopher's hands clenched into fists. So you declared my wife dead based on insufficient evidence because my cousin bribed you. It wasn't just the money, Palmer insisted. Caleb convinced me it was merciful, that prolonging the uncertainty would only cause more pain for you and your daughter. The search teams had found nothing after days of looking. The river was raging. The chances of survival were negligible. That wasn't your decision to make, Christopher said, barely controlling his rage. Palmer nodded miserably. I know that now, when I saw the news about that woman who was found alive after being declared dead in a similar accident last year. The guilt became unbearable. He opened a drawer and removed a thick folder. This is everything. My original examination notes, communications with Caleb, the falsified paperwork, it's all there. Christopher took the folder, his expression stony. Why would Caleb do this? What possible motivation could he have? Palmer hesitated. I can only tell you what I observed. He was eager to have the matter resolved quickly, unusually so for someone who just lost a family member. Did Isabella ever consult you professionally about anything unusual before her trip? Concerns about her safety, perhaps? Palmer frowned. No. She did call me about 2 weeks before the accident. She wanted information about water contamination testing. Specifically, how to document evidence of groundwater pollution for potential legal action. She mentioned she'd found something concerning in California, but wouldn't elaborate over the phone. Christopher's mind raced. Isabella had been preparing to document something potentially damaging to whoever wanted that land and its water rights. Dr. Palmer, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do the right thing, Christopher said, tucking the folder under his arm. Contact the proper authorities and provide them with these same documents. If you do this voluntarily, I'll speak on your behalf regarding cooperation. If not, he let the threat hang in the air. Palmer nodded, defeated. I'll call them today. Rachel sat cross-legged on her bed, papers spread around her. The migraine that had plagued her since meeting Christopher Henderson had finally subsided. Leaving behind a strange clarity, she'd spent the day going through every document in her possession, searching for clues to her past, or to determine if she even had one, before waking up in the Sullivans' home. Her journal lay open beside her, filled with fractured memories recorded over years. Some seemed to align with Isabella Henderson's life. Others remained puzzling. On her lap sat a legal-sized envelope she'd discovered at the back of her closet, marked in Ruth Sullivan's handwriting. Rachel's belongings, found with her. She'd avoided opening it for years, following Ruth's advice to let memories return naturally rather than forcing them. But now, with her identity in question, Rachel needed answers. Inside the envelope, she found a waterlogged wallet, its contents mostly destroyed except for a few scraps of paper with illegible writing, a plastic hotel keycard for the Mountain View Lodge, a broken watch stopped at 9:47, and at the bottom, something that made her breath catch, a small USB drive in a waterproof case. Rachel reached for her laptop, inserted the drive, and held her breath. To her surprise, it worked, opening to reveal a single folder labeled Aquifer Survey, Confidential. Inside were dozens of files, geological reports, water quality analyses, maps, and photographs. The data meant little to Rachel, but she recognized the handwriting on the scanned notes. Her own. A knock at her door startled her. "Rachel," Miguel called. "There's someone here to see you." "Who is it?" she asked, hastily gathering the papers. "That doctor from Ventura, Ramirez, says it's important." Rachel frowned. Dr. Ramirez rarely made house calls anymore, especially not this far out. "I'll be right there." In the living room, Dr. Ramirez, a kind-faced man in his 60s who had treated her injuries when Arthur and Ruth first found her, sat nervously on the edge of the sofa. "Dr. Ramirez," Rachel greeted him. "Is everything all right?" "No, my dear, I'm afraid it isn't." He glanced at Miguel. "Perhaps we could speak privately." After Miguel reluctantly left, Ramirez leaned forward. "Rachel, I've been visited by a private investigator asking questions about your injuries from 5 years ago." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Christopher Henderson sent him." Ramirez nodded. "I refused to disclose your medical information, of course, but he already knew so much. He mentioned your wedding ring, the inscription inside it." Rachel unconsciously touched her bare ring finger. The gold band remained in its box by her bed, a mysterious artifact from a life she couldn't remember. "What did you tell him?" she asked quietly. "Nothing specific," Ramirez assured her. "But Rachel, I've always respected Arthur and Ruth's wishes to protect your privacy. However, if you truly are this man's missing wife..." "I don't know who I am," Rachel admitted, her voice breaking. "I've been having more memories, dreams of a little girl, a life in Chicago, and just now, I found a USB drive with geological surveys that apparently I created." Dr. Ramirez reached for her hand. "When you were brought to me, your injuries were severe, consistent with a car accident and time spent in water. The traumatic amnesia didn't surprise me, but I always believed your memories would return eventually." "What if they don't?" Rachel whispered. "What if I never know for certain?" "There are tests," Ramirez suggested gently. "DNA comparisons with the child, medical records that would show matching scars, dental work." Rachel shook her head. "It's not that simple. If I am Isabella Henderson, why was I in that accident? Why hasn't Christopher acknowledged the possibility that the crash might not have been an accident at all?" "What do you mean?" Rachel showed him the USB drive. "These surveys show extensive water reserves under this valley, extremely valuable in a drought. Someone tried to buy this land from Arthur and Ruth for years before I arrived. Now Christopher's cousin is pressuring me to sell. What if Isabella discovered something someone wanted to keep hidden?" Ramirez's expression grew troubled. "That's a serious accusation, which is why I need to understand what happened before I reveal myself, if I am her." Rachel took a deep breath. "Dr. Ramirez, I need to know everything about my injuries when I was found. Every detail." "I kept detailed records," he acknowledged, "including photographs of your injuries and the personal effects Arthur brought in. Your clothes, jewelry, everything. I need to see them, Rachel said firmly. Ramirez nodded slowly. I'll bring everything tomorrow, but Rachel, be careful. If what you're suggesting is true, if someone deliberately tried to harm you, they might try again if they discover you're alive. After the doctor left, Rachel returned to her bedroom and picked up the gold wedding band. She held it to the light, reading the inscription again. C&I. Our love defies time. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Christopher Henderson. I need to speak with you urgently. I have proof of who you really are. Rachel stared at the message, her heart pounding. Proof. The word both thrilled and terrified her. If she was Isabella Henderson, she had a husband, a daughter, a life waiting to be reclaimed. But she also had an enemy who had already tried to kill her once. She texted back a single word. When Madison Henderson sat on the porch swing of their rented ranch house, legs swinging absently as she watched the driveway. Her father had left hours ago for what he called an important meeting, promising to be back for dinner. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the agave fields. Miss Madison, called Mrs. Torres, the housekeeper. Time to come in and wash up for dinner. 5 more minutes, Madison pleaded. I want to wait for Daddy. Mrs. Torres's expression softened. Your father called. He'll be a bit late. But he asked us to start without him. Madison frowned, but obediently slid off the swing as she turned toward the house. A sleek black car she didn't recognize pulled up to the gate. Madison, called a familiar voice. Her cousin Caleb emerged from the car, waving cheerfully. Just the person I wanted to see. Cousin Caleb. Madison hesitated, glancing back at Mrs. Torres, who had retreated inside. Despite her father's obvious trust in him, Madison had always felt uncomfortable around Caleb. Something about his smile never quite reached his eyes. Where's your dad? Caleb asked, approaching the porch. At a meeting, Madison replied cautiously. He'll be back soon. Perfect timing, Caleb grinned. I have a surprise for you. Hop in the car and I'll show you. Madison took a step back. I'm not supposed to go anywhere without Daddy or Mrs. Torres. Caleb's smile dimmed slightly. This is different. It's a special surprise about your mom. Madison froze. My mom. Yes. Caleb nodded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I found something of hers. Something important that your dad doesn't know about. Don't you want to see it before he gets back? Madison hesitated. Her father had always been open about her mother, showing her pictures and telling stories. But lately, he seemed distracted, secretive. What if Caleb really had found something special? I should tell Mrs. Torres, she said, turning toward the door. Caleb's hand shot out, gripping her arm more firmly than necessary. No time. It's a surprise for her too. Come on, Maddie. Don't you trust me? We're family. Against her better judgment, Madison let herself be led to the car. Where are we going? Not far, Caleb assured her, helping her into the back seat. Just up to the ridge. There's a special place your mom used to visit. She loved the view. As the car pulled away, Madison felt a flutter of anxiety. This didn't feel right, but Caleb was her cousin, her father's trusted business partner. Surely he wouldn't do anything to harm her. Christopher sat across from Rachel at a small cafe in Ventura, chosen for its privacy and distance from both their properties. Between them on the table lay a manila folder containing Dr. Palmer's confession and medical documentation. I still can't quite believe it, Rachel whispered, staring at a photograph of Isabella Henderson, of herself, taken a month before the accident. It's like looking at a stranger who borrowed my face. Palmer's confession changes everything, Christopher said quietly. He admitted falsifying the death certificate at Caleb's request. And there's more. This afternoon I met with Dr. Ramirez, who confirmed treating you for injuries consistent with the accident, including a distinctive scar on your left shoulder that matches Isabella's medical records. Rachel unconsciously touched her shoulder where a crescent-shaped scar remained. Why would Caleb do this? What did he gain from having me declared dead? Control, Christopher explained grimly. With you gone, I retreated from actively managing the company. I became a recluse, focusing only on Madison. Caleb stepped in, gradually taking over day-to-day operations. He hesitated. But I think there's more. The timing of your accident. It happened right after you conducted a geological survey of this area. Rachel's eyes widened. The USB drive. She pulled it from her bag. I found this among my belongings. It contains survey data for this entire valley, including evidence of extensive groundwater reserves. Christopher took the drive. This matches the work you were doing before your disappearance. You called it your drought solution project, identifying untapped aquifers that could sustainably provide water during California's drought cycles. And now Caleb is determined to acquire both our properties, which sit atop the largest section of this aquifer, Rachel concluded. That can't be coincidence. No, Christopher agreed darkly. I believe he discovered your findings, realized the potential value, and he couldn't finish the sentence. And arranged for my accident, Rachel completed, her voice steady despite the horror of the realization. The car I was driving, the brakes felt strange just before the crash. I remember that now, a flash of memory. Christopher reached across the table, taking her hand. The gesture felt both foreign and achingly familiar to Rachel. We need to go to the authorities with this evidence. Rachel squeezed his hand. We need proof Caleb was involved, otherwise, it's just speculation. Christopher's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It's Mrs. Torres. She's supposed to be watching Madison, he answered, his expression rapidly shifting from confusion to alarm. When? How long ago? He stood abruptly. Call the police. I'm on my way. What's happened? Rachel demanded, rising with him. Madison's missing, Christopher said, his voice tight with fear. Caleb came to the house and took her half an hour ago. Mrs. Torres was in the kitchen and didn't realize until she called Madison for dinner. Rachel felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it took her breath away. He has our daughter. The words slipped out naturally, and neither of them commented on her use of our. In that moment, whatever Rachel remembered or didn't, she knew with absolute certainty that Madison was her child. We need to find them, she said, grabbing her jacket. Now, as they rushed to Christopher's car. Rachel's mind raced. Where would he take her? Think, Christopher. What did Mrs. Torres say exactly? Just that Caleb told Madison he had a surprise for her about her mother, something to show her before I got back. Christopher's hands shook as he started the engine. A place I would know, Rachel murmured. Somewhere significant. Her head throbbed as fragmented memories tried to surface. The ridge. There's a lookout point above Devil's Gorge. I remember surveying there just before the accident. Christopher stared at her. You remember? Pieces, she admitted. Like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But I remember that spot. It has the best view of the entire valley. You can see both our properties, the river, everything. Devil's Gorge, Christopher repeated grimly. Where your car went off the road. Rachel's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. He's recreating the scene, completing what he started 5 years ago. Christopher floored the accelerator, the engine roaring as they sped toward the mountains. Call Bennett, he instructed, passing her his phone. He's a private investigator. Tell him to meet us at Devil's Gorge Lookout and to bring backup. As Rachel made the call, Christopher reached into the glove compartment and removed a small revolver. Just in case, he said, noticing her alarmed expression. I pray we won't need it. Madison must be terrified, Rachel whispered once she'd finished the call. She's strong, Christopher said, though his voice betrayed his fear. Like her mother. Rachel closed her eyes, focusing on the fractured memories of her daughter. Madison's first steps, her tiny hand clutching Rachel's finger, the lullaby she used to sing, the melody suddenly clear in her mind. I sang to her, Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. Blackbird by the Beatles. Every night before bed, she would ask me to sing it again and again. Christopher glanced at her, his own eyes glistening. You remembered. Not everything, Rachel admitted, but enough to know that Caleb has taken our daughter, and he's already tried to kill me once. Christopher reached for her hand, gripping it tightly as they raced toward the mountains, the sun setting blood red behind them. We'll find her, he promised. And this time, I won't let him hurt either of you. Twilight painted Devil's Gorge in shadows of purple and indigo. As Caleb's car wound up the narrow mountain road, Madison sat silently in the back seat, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching as familiar landmarks disappeared into darkness. Almost there, Caleb announced, his cheerful tone increasingly strained. He checked his rearview mirror for the third time in as many minutes. "You said we were going to see something about my mom," Madison reminded him, her voice small but steady. "But we've been driving forever. Patience, kiddo." Caleb's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "This is a special place. Your mom discovered something important here." Madison pressed her face against the window, peering into the gathering darkness. Something about Caleb's behavior felt wrong. The way he kept checking the mirrors, his forced smile, how he'd ignored 3 calls on his phone. "Does Daddy know where we are?" she asked carefully. Caleb's smile tightened. It's a surprise for him, too. The car rounded a bend and pulled into a small gravel overlook. Below, the gorge yawned like an open mouth, the distant sound of rushing water echoing from its depths. A simple metal guardrail was all that separated the viewpoint from the sheer drop. "Here we are," Caleb announced, cutting the engine. "Devil's Gorge Lookout, best view in the county." Madison made no move to get out. "I want to go home now." "In a bit," Caleb promised, checking his watch. "First, I want to tell you a story about your mom." He turned in his seat to face her. "Did you know she was working on a very important project before her accident?" Madison nodded hesitantly. "Daddy said she was studying water." "That's right, underground water that could help during droughts." Caleb's voice took on a lecturing tone. "Your mom was very smart. She discovered something valuable right here. Water under these mountains that would be worth millions to whoever controlled it." "Is that why you want the farm lady's land?" Madison asked, surprising Caleb. "Aren't you observant?" he muttered. "Yes, partly, but there's more to the story." He paused dramatically. "What if I told you your mom didn't actually die in an accident?" Madison's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "What if?" Caleb continued, watching her reaction carefully. "She survived somehow. What if she's been hiding all this time? Like the farm lady," Madison whispered, hope blossoming across her face. "I knew it. I told Daddy she looked like Mommy." Caleb's expression darkened. "You've been talking to your dad about this." Madison realized her mistake too late. "Just a little," she hedged. Caleb cursed under his breath, then forced another smile. "Come on, let's get out and enjoy the view while we wait." "Wait for what?" Madison asked, not moving. "For your dad, of course," Caleb replied smoothly. "I messaged him to meet us here. He'll be along any minute." It was a lie. Madison was certain. Madison. But she decided playing along might be safer than arguing. Reluctantly, she climbed out of the car, staying close to the vehicle and away from the edge. Caleb paced near the guardrail, repeatedly checking his phone. "No signal," he muttered. "Perfect." Madison studied the road they'd driven up, wishing for headlights to appear. Instead, she noticed something else. A narrow dirt path leading away from the overlook, hugging the mountainside. "What's that path?" she asked, pointing. Caleb glanced over distractedly. Nothing important. An old maintenance trail. But Madison remembered something. A story her father had told her about her mother being an avid hiker, who always found the hidden paths others missed. In that moment, she made a decision. "I need to use the bathroom," she announced. Caleb looked annoyed. "We're on a mountain, kid. Find a bush or something." He waved vaguely toward a cluster of scrub oak away from the edge. Madison nodded and walked casually in that direction, then ducked behind the foliage. Instead of stopping, she kept going, moving quickly and quietly toward the narrow path she'd spotted. Just as she reached it, she heard Caleb call her name. "Madison, where are you?" His voice carried an edge of panic. She didn't answer, instead scrambling onto the path and moving as fast as she dared in the fading light. The trail was rough but manageable, contouring around the mountainside rather than descending directly into the gorge. "Madison!" Caleb's shout echoed off the canyon walls. "Get back here now!" She heard him crashing through the bushes behind her and quickened her pace, heart pounding. She didn't know where the path led, but anywhere seemed safer than staying with Cousin Caleb. Christopher's Range Rover ate up the miles, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness as they raced toward Devil's Gorge. Beside him, Rachel gripped the door handle, trying to control her rising panic. "There's something you should know," she said suddenly. "About the gorge, there's another way down. A maintenance trail that branches off from the main lookout. It's not on most maps." Christopher glanced at her sharply. "How do you know that?" "I used it during my survey work," Rachel explained. It provides access to the lower canyon without having to drive all the way around. She frowned, concentrating. The memory is hazy, but I'm certain it exists. Could Caleb know about it? Possibly, if he's been researching the area thoroughly. Rachel's voice tightened with fear. If he wants to stage another accident. Christopher pressed the accelerator harder. We're almost there. 5 more minutes. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Bennett. On my way with local police. 15 minutes out. Too long, Christopher muttered. We need to get to Madison now. As they rounded the final bend, Christopher killed the headlights and coasted the last 100 yards. A single car was visible at the lookout. Caleb's black sedan. He's here, Rachel whispered. But I don't see them. Christopher parked a short distance away and retrieved the revolver from the glove compartment. Stay in the car, he instructed. No, Rachel's voice was firm. She's my daughter too, and I know this area better than you do. Before Christopher could argue, a shout echoed across the canyon. Caleb's voice, angry and panicked. Madison! She's run, Rachel realized. Smart girl. They moved quickly but cautiously toward the lookout. Staying low, Caleb's car stood empty, its doors open. At the edge of the clearing, they could hear Caleb crashing through underbrush, still calling for Madison. The trail, Rachel whispered, pointing. He's following her down the maintenance path. Without hesitation, they moved toward the trailhead. As they reached it, Christopher grabbed Rachel's arm. Wait, I hear something. Faint but distinct came the sound of a child crying, somewhere below them on the trail. Madison, Christopher called softly. Madison, it's Dad. Daddy. Madison's voice floated up from the darkness. Daddy, help. Cousin Caleb is acting weird. Stay where you are, sweetheart, Christopher called. We're coming to get you. Rachel touched Christopher's arm. Let me go first. I know this trail. Christopher hesitated, then nodded. Rachel moved ahead, picking her way carefully down the path. The trail narrowed, hugging the cliff face with a steep drop to one side. About 50 yards down, they found Madison huddled against the rock wall, tears streaking her dirty face. Daddy, she cried, launching herself into Christopher's arms. It's okay, princess, he soothed, holding her tight. You're safe now. Madison looked past him, her eyes widening as she saw Rachel. You came too, she whispered. Rachel knelt beside them, her throat tight with emotion. Of course I did. I knew it was you, Madison said with absolute certainty. I knew you were my mommy. Before Rachel could respond, a voice came from further down the trail. How touching, Caleb said, stepping into view. The moonlight glinted off the pistol in his hand. The happy family reunion, 5 years too late. Christopher pushed Madison behind him, shielding her with his body. It's over, Caleb. We know everything. The falsified death certificate, the sabotaged brakes, all of it. Caleb laughed bitterly. And yet here we are again. History repeating itself. He gestured with the gun. Step away from them, Chris. This doesn't have to involve you. Are you insane? Christopher demanded. You're threatening my wife and daughter. Wife! Caleb spat the word. She was never good enough for you. A scholarship student who caught the eye of the golden boy Henderson. Do you know how pathetic it was watching you worship her? Isabella the brilliant, Isabella the perfect. You were in love with her, Christopher realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. She never even saw me, Caleb continued as if Christopher hadn't spoken. Too blinded by your charm, your money, your position, and then she had to go playing environmental savior, discovering that damned aquifer that would have made me rich. So you tried to kill me, Rachel said, her voice steady despite her fear. Because I wouldn't sell you the survey data. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You remember that? I remember enough, Rachel replied. I remember you offering to buy my research privately, saying we could both profit. I remember refusing because the data needed to be public for drought mitigation. And I remember the brakes failing on a road I'd driven safely dozens of times before. You should have died in that gorge, Caleb said coldly. And now, you all will. He raised the gun, but Rachel was already moving, lunging forward with unexpected speed. She collided with Caleb just as the weapon fired, the bullet whizzing past Christopher's ear. The impact sent them both staggering toward the edge of the narrow trail. Rachel! Christopher shouted, Unable to help without exposing Madison, Rachel grappled with Caleb, fighting for the gun. Her foot slipped on loose gravel, and for a heart-stopping moment, she teetered on the edge of the drop. Caleb, seeing his advantage, shoved hard. "No!" Madison screamed, but instead of falling, Rachel dropped to one knee, using Caleb's momentum against him. He stumbled past her, arms windmilling as he fought for balance. The gun clattered to the trail as Caleb pitched forward into empty space, his scream fading as he plummeted into the darkness below. Rachel collapsed on the trail, breathing hard, her head throbbing with pain where Caleb had struck her during the struggle. Christopher rushed to her side, Madison clinging to his back. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands gently examining her for injuries. "Just a bump," Rachel assured him, though her vision swam alarmingly. "Madison, are you okay, sweetie?" "You saved us," Madison whispered, sliding down from her father's back to kneel beside Rachel. "You remembered how to fight, like you used to show me with the pillows." Rachel smiled weakly, even as darkness edged her vision. "I remember," she murmured, though the memory was still fragmentary. "I remember you, Madison." Then the pain in her head crescendoed, and consciousness slipped away, the last sound she heard being Christopher's desperate voice calling a name she now knew was truly hers. "Isabella." The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first sound Isabella heard as consciousness gradually returned. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but she forced them open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lighting of what was clearly a hospital room. "She's waking up," a child's voice whispered. "Madison, doctor said to let her come around slowly," came Christopher's gentle response. "Don't crowd her." "Princess?" Isabella turned her head slightly, wincing at the throb of pain the movement caused. Christopher sat in a chair beside the bed, Madison curled against his side, both watching her with identical expressions of anxious hope. "Hi," she managed, her voice raspy from disuse. "Rachel." Christopher leaned forward, uncertainty evident in his voice. "How are you feeling?" She considered the question, along with the name he'd used. Fragments of memories swirled in her mind, some as Rachel Sullivan, others as Isabella Henderson, neither identity feeling completely whole. "Confused," she admitted. "How long have I been here?" 3 days, Christopher answered. "You hit your head pretty hard during the struggle with Caleb." Madison slipped from her father's side and approached the bed cautiously. "Do you remember me?" The question, so simple yet loaded with hope and fear, broke Isabella's heart. She reached out her hand, which Madison took immediately. "I remember you like the sunrise," Isabella whispered. "Not all at once, but in pieces of light and color that keep getting brighter." Madison's face lit up. "You remember?" "Some things," Isabella acknowledged. "Your favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flopsy, the stars we painted on your bedroom ceiling, the lullaby I used to sing." "Blackbird," Madison confirmed eagerly. "I remember falling," Isabella continued, her gaze shifting to Christopher. "The car going over the edge, the water rushing in." She shuddered. "And before that, I remember arguing with Caleb at the hotel. He wanted my research data, said we could make millions if we controlled the water rights, when I refused. He sabotaged your car," Christopher finished. Isabella nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through her skull. "What happened to him?" "After the cliff. They recovered his body yesterday," Christopher said quietly. "Along with the gun, between that and the evidence we had already gathered. Palmer's confession, the falsified death certificate, the survey data. The police have closed the case." "And your mother?" Isabella asked hesitantly, memories of Janet Henderson's disapproval flooding back. Christopher's expression darkened. "She had a stroke when the police came to question her about Caleb. She's in a facility in Chicago. The doctors aren't optimistic about recovery." "I'm sorry," Isabella said, meaning it despite everything. "She never knew about Caleb's plans," Christopher assured her, "but she did help him consolidate power in the company after your disappearance. She believed it was better for me to grieve privately while Caleb handled business matters." Madison, growing impatient with the adult conversation, squeezed Isabella's hand. "Are you coming home with us? To our real home in Chicago?" The question hung in the air, enormously complex despite its simple phrasing. Home. What did that word even mean now? She had two lives, two identities. Isabella Henderson, corporate wife and mother, and Rachel Sullivan, independent farmer with her own hard-won existence. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "I need time to sort through everything." "But you're my mom," Madison insisted, her lower lip trembling. "You belong with us." Christopher placed a gentle hand on Madison's shoulder. "Remember what we talked about. This is complicated for your mom. She built a whole life as Rachel." Isabella felt tears welling in her eyes. "I need you to understand something, Madison. I'm both people now, Rachel and Isabella. I remember more every day, but I can't just erase the last 5 years." Madison considered this with surprising maturity. "Like when I get a new birthday present but still love my old toys too." Isabella laughed softly despite her tears. "Something like that. Yes." A knock at the door interrupted them as Dr. Ramirez entered, smiling when he saw Isabella awake. "Ah, good. How's our patient feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Isabella admitted. "But remembering more. The blow to your head seems to have triggered what we call memory cascade, when trauma that initially caused amnesia is somewhat replicated. Sometimes the blocked memories can flood back." He checked her vitals as he spoke. "It's quite remarkable, actually." "Will she remember everything?" Christopher asked. "It's impossible to say," Ramirez replied. "Memory is complex. Some things may never return completely, but the foundation seems to be there." He turned to Isabella. "I've been consulting with neurologists about your case. They're optimistic but recommend patience." After the doctor left, a comfortable silence fell over the room. Madison had climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, holding Isabella's hand as if afraid she might disappear again. "What happens now?" Isabella finally asked. "Legally, you're still Isabella Henderson," Christopher explained. "Once you're medically cleared, we'll need to file paperwork too. Well, resurrect you officially. Your death certificate will be invalidated." "And the farm?" she asked. "My life as Rachel." Christopher hesitated. "That's entirely up to you. The land is yours, regardless of which name you use. Miguel has been caring for it while you've been here. And us." The question was barely audible. Christopher met her gaze directly. "That's up to you too. I've spent 5 years mourning you, Isabella. I never stopped loving you, but I understand that you're not the same person who left Chicago that day. Neither am I." Something in his honest vulnerability broke through the final barrier in Isabella's mind. Memories cascaded through her consciousness. Their first meeting at a charity gala, his proposal on a sailboat in Lake Michigan, the birth of Madison, afternoons in their garden, arguments and reconciliations, thousands of moments that defined a life together. "I remember our wedding," she whispered. "You were so nervous you dropped the ring." Christopher's eyes widened. "You remember that?" She nodded. "And the honeymoon in Bali, the villa with the outdoor shower where a monkey stole your aftershave." Madison giggled. "Daddy never told me that story." "There are lots of stories," Isabella said, smiling despite her tears. "And I remember them now, not all, but many." Christopher took her free hand, his touch both familiar and new. "We have time for all the stories. The old ones and the new ones we'll make together, if that's what you want." 1 year later, Isabella stood on the spot where Arthur and Ruth Sullivan had found her half dead on the riverbank. The small clearing had been transformed, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for a very special occasion. Rows of chairs faced a simple arbor, woven with the lavender and sage that grew abundantly on the farm. "Nervous?" Miguel asked, appearing at her side in an unaccustomed suit. "Strangely, no," Isabella replied, smoothing the simple white dress she had chosen for the renewal of her vows with Christopher. "It feels right." The past year had been one of healing and integration. She had legally reclaimed her identity as Isabella Henderson, while honoring her life as Rachel Sullivan. The farm had been transformed into the Sullivan-Henderson Foundation, a center dedicated to helping amnesia victims and developing sustainable water management practices for drought-stricken areas. Christopher had relocated much of Henderson Global's operations to California, dividing his time between business responsibilities and family life. The old Henderson mansion in Chicago had been sold, too filled with painful memories for any of them to feel comfortable there. And Madison had blossomed, secure in the knowledge that her mother had returned and would never leave again. She had taken to farm life with enthusiasm, developing a particular talent for working with the rescue horses Isabella had brought to the property. Isabella watched as guests arrived: Christopher's business associates, her former colleagues from the geology department, the medical professionals who had helped with her recovery, and the neighbors who had known her as Rachel. 2 lives merging into one. "It's time," Miguel said, offering his arm. As Isabella walked toward the arbor where Christopher and Madison waited, she felt the weight of the medallion around her neck, the simple I that had been both a mystery and a clue. Today, she would add a second pendant beside it, an R, acknowledging that both identities were now permanently part of who she was. Christopher's eyes shone with love as she approached. Beside him, Madison beamed in her flower girl dress, bouncing slightly with excitement, as Isabella took her place before the officiant. She looked out over the assembled guests to the view beyond. The farms, the mountains, the gorge in the distance, the place where she had lost herself and ultimately found herself again. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the renewal of vows between Isabella and Christopher, a love that truly defied time, distance, and even memory itself." Christopher squeezed her hand, and Isabella squeezed back. "Finally whole, finally home. Our love defies time," she whispered, echoing the inscription in their wedding bands. And as the sun set over the valley that had witnessed both her greatest tragedy and her most miraculous rebirth, Isabella Henderson embraced her past, her present, and the future that stretched before them. A future built on love that neither death nor amnesia could erase,